Hey hams, this is Kevin, AD0IM. And what you're looking at, some of you may recognize, is the main circuit board for the QCX QRP transceiver kit. Now these kits come in monoband configurations or choices. So when you go onto QRP Labs to order one of these, you've got to decide what band you want to operate in. They do have a multi-band version listed on their website as a future product, but when I ordered this particular kit, it was not yet available. By the way, we're recording this in mid-January, so give you a little bit of a time frame. Now, full disclosure, this is my second attempt at this kit. I built one last fall, and it did not go well. This is not a kit for beginners. It requires a fair amount of soldering experience and steady hands, neither of which I had on my first attempt at this. And I have destroyed all documentary evidence that attempt even took place. So this is a new kit, and I've already done some of the work, not a ton, but a little bit. And I'll be recording more updates as I move forward, but I wanted to give you a little look at it and show you just a couple of things about it. I know there's other videos out there on this. I'm not breaking any ground with this, but I think it's a neat little kit. And if you have a little more experience than I do with building these kinds of things, I think it's a good kit. It comes with, it's got a jillion parts on it. You can see, all the, whoa, lost my camera there. Let me get the light out of the way a little bit here so there's less glare, but you can see on the printed circuit board here all of the through holes that are on this board. Now, not all of these are used, but the vast majority of them are. And there's a ton of components and a ton of soldering that has to be done here. Now, all these IC sockets that you see on this board already, there's really only one that comes with the kit, and that's the long one here. The rest of these are aftermarket IC sockets that I purchased and put on the board. And the first time I attempted to build this kit, I did not use sockets. The fellow who designed the kit doesn't really recommend sockets, but I think it increases our margin for error a little bit, especially if you're a beginner. You're not going to really put the socket or put the IC itself at risk while you're soldering a whole bunch of stuff around it. So the sockets are inexpensive, easy to get. So I went ahead and got some, and I know other people have used sockets on their boards, so it's not like I did anything new here. So I went ahead and got some sockets, and I've installed them. They're all pretty clean. I'll show you the back of the board here in a moment. So that's the main PC board. There are two boards for this. One is this one, and there's another one that mounts vertically over here, kind of in the orientation of my hand. And that'll have the LCD on it and all of the control knobs and everything. And on the back of the box is where all the jacks, the power input, and your Morse code paddle and all those kinds of things. The inputs and outputs will all be back here. The enclosure itself, I've got in a box. It's the enclosure I bought for my first attempt at this, and it was not damaged in any way when I was messing with the first iteration of this. So the enclosure is fine. So I did not buy a new enclosure for this, but I'll show that to you at a later date. But for now, I've got all the IC sockets on. The very first, you can say it there, the very first toroid, which is a topic of discussion all by itself. I'll go into that on a later video, and so on and so forth. Now the documentation for this is pretty extensive. The manual is over 200 pages. The assembly manual is over 200 pages. Well, I've broken that down a little bit, and I've taken some of the pages out, and by topic, given them their own little binders. So once you've completed assembling this kit initially, you're going to have to perform some alignment procedures to make sure that it's configured properly to transmit and receive on the band that your particular kit is designed for. There's an operating manual. This is actually a separate document. This is not part of the assembly manual that you download when you first start to work on your kit. This is a completely separate document, but it's one I intend to have handy when I start operating on this thing, assuming that this particular one works after I'm done with it. These are just the pages that are at the front of the manual and that aren't really part of the assembly instructions. There's not really very many here. It's about 13 or 14 pages, but it does give you a good schematic and PCB layout. You know, some really handy drawings on just what the board's going to look like once you've got everything installed. And in this particular segment here, this particular group of pages, which is like from like 103 to 138, this goes into the design of the kit and all the different systems. Sorry about the shadows there, guys. All the different circuits that make up this kit. I've not read this a ton, but I have promised myself that as I assemble this thing, I'm going to be reading along and doing some studying to make sure I understand just what I'm doing here. The first time I put this together, I was just doing color by numbers. You know, not when we were all kids. Your parents would buy you one of those color by number books, and that's pretty much all I was doing with this. This time I'm bound and determined to be a little smarter about it. I'm going a lot slower on my soldering, and I'm taking my time and just show you how the assembly manual is laid out. If you've never seen it, you know, the first few pages talk about the winding this initial transformer toroid and getting it soldered onto the board, and there's several pages devoted to that. And then it goes, let me get past that. We're up to page 22 and it's still talking about it. And then it goes component by component. Let me get this thing out of the shadow here. There we go. The manual takes you component by component. So this particular page, page 24, is devoted to installing the IC socket, the long IC socket that's on the left-hand side of the board, and then installing the IC chips. Now I installed sockets there, and it shows you where on the board everything goes as you're working through this. So it's pretty easy to follow. Today I put about 16 capacitors on here. You can just follow the numbers, and if you do it correctly, it's bound to work. But I made some mistakes last time. Didn't really figure out exactly where my mistakes were, but I did, and it just wouldn't work. My theory is, and this was shared by a friend of mine who's much more experienced in these things than I am, that I burned IC1 somewhere along the way, and you know, we'll talk about that later. But we'll find out a little further down the road. We'll talk about that a little more. So I'm up to page 27 and ready to continue to installing some more capacitors. So that's kind of how the documentation's all laid out. It helps to have this thing printed in color. So if you're printing at home and you don't have a color printer, might be worth it to take it to Kinko's, or if you have a color printer at your office. I didn't say that out loud. You might go ahead and sneak in there and print it there. But if you're gonna go through this, print the assembly manual in color, so that you can actually see where everything goes. So enough on that. Let's take a look at the back of the board here, so we can see how my soldering is going on this baby. And I can tell you categorically and subjectively that my soldering is markedly better this time than it was looking last time. So just give you a little tour of the back of the board here. There's an IC up there. It's going to be hard to zoom in on all this, but you can see. Now I did mess one of these up I did put it in the wrong orientation, and I believe it was this one up here. And so I had to use the desoldering gun to get that thing out and put it back in the right orientation. So that's been fixed. But other than that, everything's looking pretty smooth. If this isn't doing it for you, I apologize. But I'm pretty excited about how much better my soldering has gone. These are really small through holes on this board, and so it really doesn't take very much solder. So anything you were ever taught about soldering that was not on a PCB, you might have to reset your understanding of how to solder if this for your first time soldering on a PCB. Like I said, it just doesn't take as much solder as you think it does, and if you put too much on there, you're in danger of bridging or shorting out something, which may have been what happened on my first attempt. So anyway, this is probably as much time as I'm going to spend in any one video on this project. Any future updates will be just that, updates, how it's going, any problems I may have run into, what my progress is. But I'll keep you up to date on how it goes. So until then, until my next update, this is Kevin AD0IM over at the workbench, building a QCX Plus 20 meter CW only QRP kit. 73.